All-night talks in Minsk have brought another ceasefire to eastern Ukraine. But most of the difficult questions were deferred, raising doubts about how long this, the second Minsk Accord, will hold. With me here to discuss the latest attempt to bring peace to eastern Ukraine is Philip Studemann, the FT's chief political commentator. What do you make of this latest deal? I mean, I think you're probably in the camp of people who've got some doubts about it.
Well, it would be nice to be optimistic, given the brutal fighting and the deaths and casualties that have been going on. But I think there are two things that really militate against that. I think the first is President Putin's record since the first Minsk Accord was signed in September of last year. I think the Russian side has consistently broken that accord at the beginning of this year, sending over heavy weapons into eastern Ukraine. And the second thing is, I think, is that the most difficult issues, control of the Ukrainian border, what exactly autonomy means, the line that will actually divide the Ukrainians and the Russian-backed separatists, they've really been pushed to one side. So it's a truce, but very much a truce rather than a peace.
And why do you think Putin went for this?
I think Putin has operated on this basis, pushing forward as far as he can go, and then basically coming to an agreement, particularly with the Europeans. I think the second thing is he wants to disarm and divide the West. There's been talk recently about whether the United States would lift the prohibition on the supply of arms to defensive weapons to Ukraine, lethal weapons. And I think it got to a point where Putin thought it was prudent to stop here, stop that momentum.
Do you think that particular debate about whether or not to arm the Ukrainians is now over, or is it at least on ice?
I don't think it is, because I don't think Mr. Putin's ambitions have been put to one side. Whatever the sort of legal or theoretical sovereignty issue, he wants to control the Donbass. So I think we'll have two issues still on the table in coming months. One is whether Europe renews its sanctions when they come due in the summer for renewal. And the other is, if Mr. Putin continues to push forward and help the separatists to push forward, will the United States, will President Obama decide, well, look, the least the West can do is give lethal weapons to the Ukrainian side.
And just tell me a bit more about what you think of there's been talk of an apparent or supposed divide between the US and the Europeans, and particularly Germany, as to what approach to take.
Well, I think one has to be careful on divide. There are certainly differences, and a lot of senior people in the US administration do want to arm Ukraine. Joe Biden, the vice president, has made that clear. Mr. Obama himself is a cautious leader. He's been very careful. Mrs. Merkel, who spoke at the Munich Security Conference on this issue just a few days ago, is very much against. So there are different shades of opinion, and it could turn into a divide if President Obama decides to arm the Ukrainians. But at the moment, it's a debate, a sometimes spirited debate, but a debate rather than a divide.
And just one last question: if as you've suggested, that this particular deal may not hold, and as you say, there's many questions that are unanswered, do you think the Europeans have got the stomach for tougher action if that were to be necessary? Because it seems they can't just sort of let it ride without doing anything.
Well, I think this is the central question for Mrs. Merkel in particular. At Munich, she went out of her way to say, look, we have to be patient and we have to be resolute, as we were, she said, during the Cold War. What I'm not sure about is whether Germany or Italy or France or even Britain are prepared for the patient resolve that will, I think, be necessary over time to push Mr. Putin back.
Philip Studemann, thank you very much.